Hello again, Chris Lee and Chase Robinson set to talk about South Carolina's chances of making the college football playoff. We'll look at backwards, forwards, sideways, no propaganda, just the case for, the case against. Chase, let's start here. How many playoff berths are there is a question we need to settle. This is what I think. I think Texas and Georgia both get in. Tennessee, Oregon, Penn State all get in. That's 5. I think Indiana and Notre Dame are getting in. That's 6, 7. ACC winner, that's 8. Either SMU or Clemson is getting in. Arizona State, Iowa State, that's 9. Boise State or UNLV. Actually, that's 10 total. So I think we're all in agreement of those. I think ESPN's FPI's all got those as at least a 96% chance or better to get in. Of course, if you include the auto bid odds, which are 100%. So I think we agree on that. And I think Ohio State, which was 2 last week in the rankings, is going to get in. That leaves one spot. Are we on the same page there?
Yes, I completely agree with that. Ohio State gets in. Yeah, I think there's one spot that several teams are going to be fighting for.
Okay, now I think the teams fighting for that one spot include, in no particular order, South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, Miami, and potentially if Clemson beats SMU could be in that mix too. So we're looking at those teams for one spot. Are we in agreement there? I know that ESPN's FPI's got Army and some other things like that, but I don't see it. So I think that's where we are. All right, let's look at the why South Carolina should get in. Eye test. Now, this is us thinking out loud. It's not thinking like the committee thinks. I think if you watch South Carolina right now, there's a good argument that it belongs in there. It's not the 12 best teams. We know it's not that because Boise State's not in there, but the fill in the blank of the 9 best teams or whatever that number is. Right now, it feels like South Carolina should be there with the way its offense is playing, with the way LaNorris Sellers has gotten better, with Rocket Sanders when he's healthy, running over people, and that defense that we've talked about so many times. Feels like if that is your argument in a vacuum, South Carolina belongs in the playoff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When you look at the eye test, because they look the part. I mean, they're the hottest team, one of the hottest teams in college football right now. They've got a quarterback who's dominating. Their defense is doing so good. The pass rush is great. Like, they're doing all the things to look the part as a playoff type team. So yeah, eye test would signal you towards the Gamecocks.
Okay, number 2, and this sort of goes with eye test. Just won at Clemson. Not a lot of people win there, but South Carolina now has won the last 2 trips to Clemson. That was another notch in the belt for the Gamecocks. The third thing, this is a negative that we're going to spin into a positive a little bit here. 3 losses, that's the reason they're not in. If you flip the LSU game from a loss to a win, I think South Carolina would be in as of today. There were special circumstances there. We saw the officiating. I know South Carolina's not the only team that can complain about officiating calls, potentially cost them a game, but let's enter that into the evidence. And, by the way, LaNorris Sellers also was hurt for half, 60% of the game, maybe more. I don't remember now. But he has been a big part of what they're doing. I think if you named a second half of the season player of the year in the SEC, LaNorris Sellers, I made them into one. They're that good. Sellers and Sanders would definitely be on that list. And Sanders might be too, but certainly Sellers would be. So I think that is something to consider as a little bit of an asterisk there in Carolina's favor too.
Right, yeah. And, that we've seen the committee in the past go to health of players. That kind of goes under consistency. And so, yeah, how will the committee approach that LSU game with Sellers being out? Because he's a big part of this team. He's the reason, really, they are what they are right now. They were able to beat Clemson. And so, how will they approach that? I don't think officiating will have anything to do with it, but I feel like Sellers not being in that game could help the case of Carolina in that LSU game because I think it could have gone different. But, again, that's football. That's the game. Yeah. And so the committee, like we've seen in the past, could take that into consideration when it comes down to it.
All right, before we look at the issues and then maybe try to see it through the committee's eyes in just a minute, we remind you BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL to UFC, and MMA. Head to BetOnline today to get in on all the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, the issues with Carolina getting in the playoff, and none of these are trump cards necessarily. They're just points that are going to be argued, I think, in the discussion. So nobody get upset. But 3 losses is a thing that right now we're wondering if any 3-loss team is going to make the playoff outside of potentially Georgia if it's a 3-loss team. So that's one thing. Head-to-head. Now, I'm in favor of doing these things because the argument is not how did you play so-and-so or so-and-so. It's do you have the best case? When you start arguing teams against themselves, you get in some issues at times. But if it gets down to a tie break between a couple of SEC teams, head-to-head against against Alabama and Ole Miss are going to be problematic. The Ole Miss game was in Columbia. The Alabama game, of course, that could have gone either way at the very end. That was in Tuscaloosa. But those are going to be things that the committee is going to, I'm sure, discuss if it comes down to is the last team an SEC team discussion. So that there are those things to be considered too.
Yeah, and I think that's why South Carolina was 15 in last week's college football playoff rankings with Alabama and Ole Miss ahead of them is because of the head-to-head. And so I think the committee is taking that into consideration. And part of me thinks you kind of have to in this situation where there's cases for both teams making it. It's not clear on who should get that final spot if you look at Alabama and South Carolina, because South Carolina's done good things, Alabama's done good things. They both have losses, and you can look at common opponents, but that doesn't even figure it out either. So I think in this kind of situation, the committee is left no choice but to, one, either go look at head-to-head, or 2, put someone else in there and don't put either one of them in there. That's the easiest way out, and the committee likes easy ways we're finding. And so I think that's 2 things that they're going to look at is 1, head-to-head, or 2, forget about them. Let's put somebody else in there. Let's put Miami in that final spot.
Now, the one thing that is a positive that I forgot to mention, if you were looking at losses, just not the margin of victory, just who you lost to. At Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU. Those are Carolina's losses. You look at Alabama's. Those are at Tennessee, at Oklahoma, at Vandy. Would rather have Carolina's losses if you're looking at that. Ole Miss's at LSU, Kentucky, at Florida. Look at Miami's losses. Those are going to be at Georgia Tech, at Syracuse. I don't think that's an argument from strength that you ever want to get down to, but I think you could mention that the losses maybe are less damaging, even if there is one more. So that's something to consider. There's also this, though, unfortunately for South Carolina, really good wins, but not an elite one against a team that's getting in the playoff. For example, if you're Alabama, you've already banked, let's see, Georgia, South Carolina, beat them head-to-head. At LSU, good win. Obviously, South Carolina lost LSU in Columbia. If you're looking from the standpoint of Ole Miss, beat Georgia. That's a win. There's that one win, like the win at Clemson is an outstanding win. It's a road win, which I think definitely gets them a bump up. But they don't have a win against a team that we feel like is going to be in the playoff field. And I do think that might be one thing that hurts them a little bit too.
Yeah, I could see, though, if Clemson wins the ACC, I could see South Carolina getting in. South Carolina fans, I know it'd be hard to cheer for Clemson, but if you want to get in, I think your best shot is to cheer for the Clemson Tigers to win the ACC championship, because that will be a win over a a conference champ, a win over a team in the playoff. And I could see in that scenario South Carolina jumping into that final spot. I really could if Clemson wins the ACC. So I think that's a good way for South Carolina to get in, for Clemson to win the ACC.
Yeah, and I think I had written down as a question, or maybe a thing that works against them, like if Clemson wins, does that help or hurt South Carolina? Because that is that big win, but you're also then dealing with a 2-loss SMU team in that field of consideration. Whereas if SMU wins the game outright, Clemson's not getting in. So I don't know if that hurts or helps. I feel like if it's a 3-loss Carolina against a 2-loss SMU, maybe Carolina gets the nod in that scenario, but we are just speculating here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we have no idea. We've been terrible at predicting what the committee's going to do, and I'm not even going to try to guess what they're going to do. Again, we're just laying out options, and I'm just trying to think through what the best way for them to get in and why they wouldn't. But it's going to be interesting to see because, again, several things can happen. And, I mean, we're just going to have to sit back and see what this committee decides to do, if they're going to take the easy route or if they're going to make a fan base very mad when it comes out in the final rankings.
Yeah, and I think the other question is, what does the committee do with Miami? Because it went and lost at Syracuse. Miami was 6 a week ago. There was a 9-spot difference between South Carolina and Miami. Now, both are going to move more towards the other direction with Miami's loss, and Carolina's win over Clemson can only help, you would think. At a minimum, I think Carolina would move up to 14 in the poll. But that's another one. Like the committee just kind of has its reasons sometimes. And you mentioned this pre-show. Is it easier just to give Miami a win or give Miami the one to avoid the whole SEC headache of trying to decide between those teams? And they lean on their reasons for their reasons. They could just say, we think Cam Ward is one of the best and most exciting players in the country. Therefore, Miami deserves to be in. By the way, not an endorsement, just the reality of the situation. You've heard the committee say things that don't always logically add up, which makes you think they just wanted this team or that team in. And so what the committee does with Miami is going to be another thing to watch.
Yeah, that would not surprise me at all if they put them in and left Alabama and South Carolina both out. It surprised me none. I mean, that's just how it's been. But it's going to be interesting, Chris, regardless, because, again, it could go a number of ways.
It feels to me like, again, this is not an endorsement of the decision. I'm not taking sides, but it feels to me, looking at what the committee's done, it feels like an uphill climb for South Carolina. Again, FPI is rated at a 20.9% chance. Carolina was behind both Ole Miss and Alabama last week. Now, it also got the best win of all those teams. Mississippi State is nothing special, to say the least. Alabama's win over Auburn's nice, but it was at home in the Iron Bowl, and Auburn's not going to a bowl. The question in my mind is, does the win over Clemson vault them over two teams they lost to head-to-head in the rankings? I think they were there in that order for that reason. Could be wrong. That's the question. If we settle that, then we at least know if the SEC gets another bid, it's them. But then you got the issue with Miami and maybe SMU if it loses. So that just feels like a lot to be stacked against South Carolina, fairly or unfairly.
Right, it is. And, the being ranked 15 where they were, I think is, it's a tough hill to climb.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll be here to talk about it either way. We'll probably do a playoff reaction Tuesday night, so we can talk about that. We'll be here for live reaction after the SEC championship game and other championship games around the country. So then we'll be a little less speculative because at least we will know some results. Hope you'll watch it. Thank you if you have. Leave us a thumbs up if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel and enable your notifications if you want to see what we do. For Chase Robinson, I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching Southeastern 16 presented by BetOnline.